My name is Nevaeh Baker. I was 28 the night my father raised a glass of reserve bourbon to toast my wedding rehearsal, surrounded by 12 men who did not know my last name. Richard sat at the head of a long oak table in a private Nashville dining room, his custom charcoal suit catching the low amber light. He played the benevolent patriarch perfectly, laughing with the wealthy investors he had invited to a dinner he did not plan for a daughter he had not seen in 18 years. He ordered a fourth round of drinks. He patted shoulders. He assumed I would sit quietly at my own table and foot the bill for his corporate networking event. He made one mistake. He forgot what I do for a living. I am a forensic auditor. I track missing numbers, I expose corporate fraud, and I read the fine print. When the dessert plates were cleared, I did not cause a scene. I walked over to the maitre d', handed him my credit card, and instructed him to separate the 12 uninvited men at the back table onto a distinct check. I returned to my seat beside my fiancé, Luke. I folded my hands on the crisp white tablecloth, and I listened. The booming laughter ceased. The clinking of crystal stemware stopped dead. Richard stared at a 4-figure bill he had no intention and no ability to pay. The smug executive dissolved into a cornered man. Welcome back to Pana Vengeance, where we share stories of setting boundaries and balancing the scales. How old were you when you realized toxic family members rely on your silence? Let me know in the comments and hit subscribe. To understand how a daughter hands her estranged father a financial trap on the eve of her wedding, you have to rewind. You have to go back 6 weeks to a Tuesday morning, a cup of black coffee, and a stack of mail on my kitchen island. Luke and I sat in our apartment, sorting through the responses for our garden wedding. We wanted something small. 75 guests, just the people who actually showed up for us during the hard years. Luke typed on his laptop, updating the spreadsheet, while I opened the envelopes. The morning felt ordinary. The sun warmed the hardwood floors, and the smell of roasted coffee filled the room. My thumb caught the edge of a heavy cream cardstock. It lacked a return address, just a smeared postmark from a zip code across the state. I slid my letter opener through the seal. The faint scent of a sharp, recognizable cologne drifted up from the paper. Sandalwood and clove. My stomach muscles tightened before my eyes even registered the handwriting. It was the RSVP card. The line for the guest name was filled out in thick blue fountain pen ink. Richard Baker. He checked the box for attending. But he did not stop there. He drew a sharp line through the blank space beneath it and wrote +5. I traced the blue ink with my index finger. +5. His new wife, Victoria, my 20-year-old half-sister, Madison, and 3 unnamed guests. He intended to bring a small entourage to a catered event he was never invited to. Luke noticed the shift in my breathing. He stopped typing and looked at me. His gaze dropped to the card in my hand. "Is that him?" Luke asked, his voice steady and low. I nodded, handing the card across the counter. "He hasn't called you in nearly 2 decades, Nevaeh." "I know. The last time I saw that specific shade of blue ink was on my 10th birthday. I remember the vanilla cake sitting on our dining table, the candles melting wax into the frosting while we waited. Richard walked out the front door holding a leather briefcase. He told my mother he was running to the store for ice cream. He never came back. What he did do was visit the bank on his way out of town. He drained the college savings account my mother had spent 8 years building. He took every dollar to fund a tech startup that failed 3 years later. My mother worked double shifts at a diner for the next decade to keep the electricity on. Even at 10 years old, I learned the lesson. To Richard, I was never a daughter. I was a liquid asset. Now, 18 years of silence later, he wanted a front row seat. I set the card on the granite counter. I did not cry. Crying was for people who believed an apology was coming. I am an auditor. I view relationships like ledgers, and Richard's account had been overdrawn for a very long time. I look at facts, not potential. The fact was, a man who steals a child's future does not show up to celebrate her adulthood out of love. He shows up because he wants something. He wants an audience, I told Luke. Luke picked up the card, inspected the heavy stock, and tossed it into the trash can under the sink. He is not getting one, Luke said. We went back to the spreadsheet. I poured another cup of coffee and pushed the scent of sandalwood out of my mind. I assumed that was the end of the situation, an arrogant man trying a power play from a distance, only to be ignored. When you cut off a narcissist's supply of attention, they usually find an easier target. But a man like Richard does not accept being ignored. He views boundaries as negotiations. I thought the Phantom RSVP was just a tasteless joke, a final grasp at relevance from a ghost. I had no idea it was the opening move of a calculated heist. Richard was not planning to attend my wedding. He was planning to commandeer it. The first phase of his plan did not happen in the shadows. It did not happen through angry phone calls or texts. It happened 3 days later, in broad daylight, right in the middle of a bakery in Franklin, Tennessee. The Phantom RSVP was just the bait to see if I was watching the door. I was about to find out who he sent to test the locks. The Sugar Magnolia Bakery sits off a quiet, brick-paved street in downtown Franklin. The shop smells like warm vanilla and toasted almonds, a safe and predictable environment. Luke and I sat at a small iron table near the front window. Clara, the owner, set a slate tray between us, holding 3 slices of cake. We tasted the lemon elderflower. We nodded in agreement. The morning felt insulated from the ghost of my father. Then the brass bell above the door chimed, and the illusion of safety shattered. The click of expensive heels on the honeycomb tile floor cut through the quiet hum of the bakery. I looked up from my silver fork. 2 women walked toward our table. They did not belong in a town known for antique shops and local honey. The older woman wore a beige cashmere coat that draped perfectly over her shoulders. A designer handbag hung from her forearm. Her perfume, a heavy floral scent, immediately overpowered the smell of buttercream. Behind her trailed a younger woman, with long blonde hair, chewing gum, and typing on a phone case covered in faux crystals. Victoria and Madison, Richard's new wife and my 20-year-old half-sister. My mind immediately began categorizing the variables. I did not post this cake-tasting appointment on social media. I told exactly one person outside of my bridal party, Aunt Susan, my father's sister. Susan is the type of woman who trades family secrets for country club guest passes. She measures human worth by net worth, which places Richard at the top of her hierarchy and me at the bottom. The leak was identified. Victoria bypassed the counter line. She walked directly to our small iron table. She did not offer a hug or a greeting. She stared down at the slate tray holding our cake samples. "Is this what you are choosing?" Victoria asked. Her voice carried a sharp edge disguised as maternal concern. I placed my fork onto the napkin. "Hello, Victoria," she sighed. She pulled out an iron chair that was not offered to her and sat down. Madison remained standing. Madison pushed designer sunglasses up onto her head and looked out the window. She drove a luxury German sedan funded by the same man who stole my college tuition. She looked entirely bored by the errand her mother dragged her on. "Richard sent us," Victoria said. She smoothed the lapel of her coat. "He is very concerned about the optics of this event. You are planning a backyard picnic. He is inviting the board of directors." I studied her face, the tight jaw, the perfectly manicured eyebrows. I am an auditor. I notice discrepancies in behavior just as easily as I notice them in ledgers. A father who truly wants to reconnect does not send his current wife to hijack a pastry consultation. He calls. He asks for permission. Richard sent a proxy because this was not a family matter. This was a business transaction. "We are having a 75-person garden reception," I said. My voice remained flat. "The board of directors is not invited." Victoria laughed, a dry, practiced sound meant to make me feel small. "Oh, Nevaeh, you do not understand how these things work. Richard is the father of the bride. People expect a certain standard from him. He cannot host his investors and feed them homemade lemon cake." I noted her precise word choice, host his investors. She spoke as if I were the venue and Richard were the event planner. Clara stepped out from behind the counter holding a white pastry box. She looked between the four of us, sensing the temperature in the room dropping. Victoria turned her attention away from me and focused on the baker. "We will need a 5-tier fondant cake," Victoria instructed Clara. "Something architectural. Edible gold leaf. Sugar flowers. Enough to serve 200 guests." 200. The number hung in the air. Clara blinked. She looked at me for confirmation, holding the white box against her apron. "I owe you an apology, Clara," I said. "My guests are confused about their role here." Victoria's cheeks flushed a deep, blotchy pink. Her hand reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a heavy platinum credit card and dropped it onto the glass display case. The plastic hit the glass with a loud, sharp thud that echoed in the quiet shop. "We are paying for the upgrade," Victoria said. "Do not be stubborn, Nevaeh. Let your father give you the day you deserve." I stared at the platinum card. The name embossed on the plastic read Victoria Baker. The expiration date was 3 years away. To anyone else, that card was a symbol of financial leverage. Most people would fold under the pressure of a free luxury upgrade. They would trade their autonomy for edible gold leaf and the illusion of a happy family. I did not see a gift. I saw a down payment on my compliance. Luke shifted in his chair. He did not speak. He watched me, waiting for my signal. He knew I fought my own battles. His silence was the strongest form of support I could ask for. I stood up. I picked up the platinum card by the very edge. I walked over to Victoria and placed it back into the dark interior of her open handbag. "You cannot buy a ticket to a show that is already sold out," I told her. Victoria stood. Her height advantage did not give her the leverage she expected. She searched my face for hesitation. She found nothing but a blank, unreadable ledger. "Richard will not accept this," she warned. "He promised his partners a gala." "Then he should book a hotel ballroom and host one," I replied. "He will not use my wedding as his corporate tax write-off." I turned back to Clara. "The original contract stands. We will see you on the wedding day." I picked up my purse. Luke stood, offering me his arm. We walked past Victoria and Madison without another glance. We pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the crisp Tennessee air. The brass bell chimed behind us, sealing the women inside their own embarrassment. We walked 2 blocks down the brick sidewalk to where my car was parked. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Why did Richard care so much about impressing his board of directors at an event he was not even invited to? He was the chief executive. He owned the company. Unless he needed them more than they needed him. I sat in the passenger seat while Luke started the engine. The car cabin was quiet. Luke pulled into the steady flow of downtown traffic. "That was an intense encounter," Luke said gently, keeping his eyes on the road. "It was a test," I replied. "They wanted to see if I would take the money. They wanted to see if I had a price." My phone vibrated inside my purse. A short, sharp buzz. I pulled it out. A new email notification lit up the lock screen. The sender was Experian. The subject line read, "Credit Inquiry Alert." I tapped the screen. The automated email stated a new credit inquiry was initiated 5 minutes ago. I looked at the digital timestamp on the dashboard console. The time coincided perfectly with the exact moment Victoria threw her platinum card onto the bakery counter. "Are you checking our credit scores for the honeymoon flight upgrades?" I asked Luke. He signaled for a lane change. "No, I was planning to do that tonight from my laptop. Why do you ask?" "Just a spam alert," I said. I locked my phone screen and dropped the device back into my purse. I dismissed the alert as an automated glitch. I am a forensic auditor who hunts financial deception for a living, yet I failed to recognize the breach happening in my own life. I assumed my father was simply an arrogant man trying to steal the spotlight through his wife. I did not realize he was a desperate man trying to steal my identity. The bakery ambush was just a distraction, a loud, flashy performance designed to keep my eyes focused on the cake, while a much larger theft occurred in the shadows. Victoria and Madison were the magician's left hand, waving a platinum card to draw my anger and attention. I was about to find out what the right hand was doing. When I logged into my vendor portal later that evening, I discovered Richard had not just stopped at the bakery. He had gone straight for the foundation of the wedding itself. The drive back to our Nashville apartment passed in comfortable quiet. Luke parked the car, and we walked up the stairs to our third-floor unit. I kicked off my shoes, seeking the familiar comfort of our living space. The scent of our home, a blend of cedar and clean linen, helped steady my heart rate. I hung my keys on the brass hook by the door. I assumed the confrontation at the bakery was the main event for the day. I was wrong. The bakery was merely a parlor trick. I opened my laptop on the kitchen island. I needed to update our budget spreadsheet to account for the cake deposit. As an auditor, I balance my personal accounts with the same rigid precision I apply to corporate ledgers. Every dollar has a designated place. Every expense carries a digital paper trail. I logged into the vendor management portal for our wedding venue. We had booked the Arrington Estate, a historic property surrounded by ancient oak trees and a manicured botanical garden. The portal dashboard usually displayed a green banner indicating our account was current. Tonight, the banner glowed a bright, urgent red. The notification read, "Pending invoice." I glanced at the balance due. The number on the screen made my breath catch in my throat. The total was 5 times higher than our agreed contract. I set my coffee mug onto the granite counter. A hard, cold focus took over. I clicked the billing tab, pulling up the itemized invoice. The garden reception for 75 guests was gone. In its place was a reservation for the grand ballroom. The guest count had been altered to 250 people. The modest buffet dinner was replaced by a 5-course plated service featuring prime beef and lobster. My fingers flew across the trackpad. I navigated to the document history section. System software records every interaction, every login, every keystroke. People lie. Metadata does not. I found the revised contract. At the bottom of the digital page, an electronic signature rested on the approval line. It read, Nevaeh Baker. I looked at the system timestamp next to the forged signature. The update occurred at 2:14 in the afternoon. The pieces snapped together with surgical precision. 2:14 was the exact minute Victoria threw her platinum credit card onto the bakery counter. She and Madison were a synchronized decoy. They cornered me in public, creating a loud, emotional distraction. While I was focused on defending my right to choose my own wedding cake, Richard was sitting in an office, executing a contract override. A tight knot formed in my chest. This was not a father trying to insert himself into a celebration. This was a hostile takeover. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the Arrington Estate coordinator. Her name was Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and professional. "Good evening, Nevaeh," Sarah said. "I am so glad you called. We were just processing the ballroom transition. Your father is quite the visionary." My posture straightened. I stood up from the kitchen stool. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I did not authorize a venue change." The line went silent for 3 seconds. The bright customer service tone vanished from her voice. "But I spoke with him today," Sarah stammered. "He identified himself as Richard Baker, the father of the bride. He said he was taking over the financial responsibilities to give you the day you deserve. He signed the electronic agreement." "He forged the electronic agreement," I corrected her. My voice remained level, devoid of panic. "I pay for my own life, Sarah. Richard Baker is not on the contract. He does not hold financial authority over this event." Sarah sounded frantic, the rustling of papers echoing through the phone speaker. "Nevaeh, I am so sorry. He knew your account security answers. He verified your date of birth and your mother's maiden name. I had no reason to suspect he was not authorized." I closed my eyes. The reality of the violation settled over me. Richard used the intimate details of my identity, details he retained from old child support documents, to bypass a security protocol. He weaponized my own history against me. "Cancel the ballroom reservation," I instructed. "Revert the invoice back to the garden package. From this moment forward, no changes are permitted to our account without a verbal passcode. The password is Ledger. If anyone calls attempting to alter this event, you will ask for the password. If they fail to provide it, you will hang up and notify me immediately. I will secure the account right now, Sarah promised. Her voice shook slightly. I assure you, this will not happen again. I ended the call. I placed the phone onto the island. The screen faded to black. Luke walked into the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He saw my posture, the rigid set of my shoulders. What did he do? Luke asked. He forged my signature, I said. He upgraded the venue to fit 250 people. He bypassed the security questions using my mother's maiden name. Luke stopped wiping his hands. He tossed the towel onto the counter. A quiet anger hardened his features. Do we need to involve a lawyer? Not yet, I said. I am building the file. I understood the mechanics of his strategy now. Richard assumed my 18 years of silence equated to passivity. He thought a sudden influx of luxury would blind me. He banked on the societal expectation that a daughter must gracefully accept a wealthy father's generosity. He wanted to parade me in front of his mysterious guests, utilizing my milestone as his personal theater. He underestimated his target. I do not bend to pressure. I document it. I spent the next hour calling the caterer, the photographer, and the rental company. I established the verbal password protocol with every single vendor. I locked down the perimeter of my wedding. I built a digital wall he could not scale. Just as I closed the laptop, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Luke walked over and checked the peephole. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. A courier stood in the hallway holding a thick, rigid cardboard envelope. Certified delivery for Nevaeh Baker, the courier announced. Requires a signature. I walked to the door. I signed the electronic pad, thanking the courier. I carried the heavy envelope back to the kitchen island. The return address printed in the upper left corner belonged to a corporate entity, Apex Holdings, LLC, Richard's primary venture capital firm. I slid my thumb under the cardboard flap and tore it open. Inside rested a single piece of heavy stock paper. Attached to the paper was a business check. I stared at the printed numbers. The amount was $30,000. Most people would feel a rush of relief holding a check that large. They would see a solution to their financial burdens. They would see a generous father trying to make amends for nearly 2 decades of absence. I saw a trap. I studied the face of the check. It was drawn from the corporate operating account of Apex Holdings, not Richard's personal bank account. My eyes drifted down to the memo line in the bottom left corner. A father paying for his daughter's celebration writes the word wedding in the memo line. He writes a note of congratulations. Richard did not write wedding. The memo line contained 3 typed words: corporate, retreat, gala. The puzzle pieces shifted, forming a picture I did not anticipate. A chief executive does not mislabel a $30,000 personal gift. He mislabels a business expense. Richard was not trying to fund a wedding. He was trying to wash corporate funds through my event. He intended to write off the entire ballroom reception as a business deduction, using his investors as the attendees and my marriage as the fraudulent cover story. My phone vibrated on the counter, jarring me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. The family group chat was detonating. Aunt Susan, the chief enabler, fired the first shot. She sent a long paragraph accusing me of humiliating Victoria at the bakery. Madison followed immediately, demanding I step down from my own aesthetic choices and change the bridesmaid dresses to match her skin tone. The text messages stacked up rapidly, each one heavier with guilt and manipulation. My mother sent a private message, her tone exhausted and fearful, begging me to just let Richard have his way, to keep the peace. They were turning up the emotional pressure, trying to break my resolve from all sides. But they did not know I was holding a $30,000 piece of evidence, and they did not know about the Experian credit alert sitting in my inbox, ticking like a hidden clock. The glowing screen of my cell phone illuminated the dark granite of the kitchen island. The device vibrated in short, rapid bursts, signaling a barrage of incoming text messages. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the uncashed $30,000 check resting near my coffee mug, and watched the family group chat detonate. Aunt Susan fired the opening volley. She typed a long, scrolling paragraph filled with capital letters and manufactured outrage. She accused me of humiliating Victoria at the bakery. She called me an ungrateful child who lacked the grace to accept a father's generous attempt to make amends. Susan always functioned as Richard's personal public relations manager. When he abandoned us 18 years ago, Susan blamed my mother for lacking the ambition to keep a driven man interested. To Susan, wealth equated to morality. Richard possessed money, therefore Richard could do no wrong. A second message appeared, this one from Madison. My 20-year-old half-sister did not waste time on guilt trips. She issued directives. She stated that since her family was funding the event, she expected the maid of honor title. She demanded my childhood best friend step down from the role immediately. Furthermore, Madison insisted the bridesmaid dresses be changed from sage green to a pale champagne color to better complement her complexion. I picked up the phone. The cool metal casing felt heavy in my palm. I read the demands twice. I did not feel anger. Anger requires a sense of betrayal, and betrayal implies trust existed in the first place. I felt only the cold, sharp clarity of an auditor identifying a compromised asset. I tapped the screen and opened the keyboard. I typed one single word. No. I pressed send. The chat stalled. The rapid-fire incoming messages ceased for a full minute, as if the single syllable had short-circuited their collective narrative. Then the screen lit up again, the text bubbles flying in faster than before. The accusations escalated. Luke walked into the kitchen. He watched the rapid succession of notifications flashing across the screen. He stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder. He did not offer advice or try to fix the situation. He simply provided a grounding weight in the room. He reached forward, picked up the phone, and toggled the silent switch on the side of the device. He turned the phone face down onto the granite counter, silencing the digital noise. "You do not have to answer them," Luke said softly. I leaned back against his chest. "My mother sent a private message right before you flipped it over. She is exhausted. She begged me to just let them attend. She thinks bending to his will might bring peace." Luke kissed the side of my head. "What do you think?" "I think setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm only leaves you with ashes," I replied. "Richard does not want peace. He wants a stage." The night passed. We left the phone face down. I placed the corporate check inside a plain manila folder, storing it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Morning arrived with the pale light of a Tennessee autumn. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, hoping the early hours would provide a brief respite from the tension. The hope vanished at 8:15 when my cell phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of our local florist, Brenda. I answered the call walking toward the window overlooking the street. "Good morning, Brenda," Nevaeh the florist said, her voice hesitant and strained. "I am calling to confirm the cancellation. I received the email from your luxury event firm late last night, but my policy requires verbal confirmation from the bride for a full refund." I stopped walking. The ceramic coffee mug grew warm in my hand. "I do not have a luxury event firm, Brenda." A heavy silence stretched across the line. "I received a formal cancellation notice from Apex Event Planning." Brenda explained, her tone shifting from hesitant to concerned. The email stated Richard Baker, the financial sponsor of the event, was restructuring the vendor list. They requested the deposit be refunded to the original card on file. Richard moved fast. Blocked from the venue portal by my password protocol, he pivoted his attack to the unprotected targets. He searched the perimeter of my wedding looking for unlocked doors. He found the florist before I had the chance to secure her account. "Do not process that refund," I instructed Brenda. "The order remains active." Apex Event Planning is an unauthorized entity attempting to interfere with my personal contracts. I will call you this afternoon to establish a verbal security passcode for all future communications. I ended the call. The sheer audacity of his strategy crystallized in my mind. He was systematically dismantling my intimate wedding, replacing my chosen vendors with high-end corporate contractors hired under his own name. He intended to walk into an event he fully controlled, leaving me as a mere prop in a white dress. I set the coffee mug down. I walked to the hallway closet and retrieved my leather work tote. I pulled out my company-issued laptop and a specific red felt-tip pen I used to mark fraudulent discrepancies. I returned to the kitchen island and opened the computer. The time for playing the role of a frustrated bride had passed. The moment required a forensic auditor. A wealthy chief executive does not micromanage floral deposits. A wealthy chief executive does not forge venue upgrades in the middle of the afternoon. These were the frantic, sloppy actions of a desperate man. I thought about the $30,000 check resting in the desk drawer, the memo line reading Corporate Retreat Gala. I thought about the Experian credit inquiry alert that pinged my phone during the bakery ambush. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the State Business Registry database. I typed in the name Apex Holdings, LLC. I paid the nominal fee to pull the public operating documents and the annual tax filings for the past 3 years. The screen populated with rows of financial data. I began reading. The numbers flowed into columns, telling a story Richard desperately wanted to hide. Apex Holdings was an empty shell. The primary venture capital firm he boasted about at country club dinners reported catastrophic consecutive losses. 2 of his major commercial real estate projects had defaulted. The public records indicated multiple liens placed against his corporate assets by secondary lenders. I picked up the red pen. I jotted the debt figures onto a legal pad. Richard was not a wealthy titan of industry. He was drowning in toxic debt. He needed a massive injection of liquidity to survive the fiscal year. To secure a bridge loan from new investors, he needed to project an image of untouchable success. He needed to host a lavish, high-profile networking event to court the exact men he intended to defraud. He could not afford to host a gala on his own. So he decided to hijack my wedding. He would invite his marks, feed them prime beef and lobster, and write the entire evening off as a corporate expense to manipulate his tax liabilities. I stared at the red numbers on the legal pad. The scheme made sense, but a glaring discrepancy remained. If Apex Holdings was insolvent and Richard possessed no personal liquidity, how was he funding the venue upgrade and the luxury event planners? The $30,000 check was drawn from a depleted account. It would bounce the moment I tried to cash it. He needed clean, untraceable credit to execute the illusion. My heart rate slowed to a deliberate, rhythmic thud. I minimized the business registry window. I opened a new tab and navigated to the primary Consumer Credit Bureau portal. I typed in my own Social Security number, the same 9-digit number printed on the child support documents my mother filed nearly 2 decades ago. The same documents Richard kept in his possession. I requested a comprehensive credit report. The loading icon spun for 3 seconds. The digital page rendered. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up the red pen and drew a thick, bright circle around 3 open accounts I did not authorize. The trap he set for me was far more dangerous than ruined floral arrangements or an unwanted guest list. He was building his house of cards on the foundation of my stolen identity. The 3 circles in red ink stared back at me from the illuminated monitor. A platinum travel card, a high-tier rewards account, a short-term personal loan. I tallied the running balances in my head. The total hovered just below $80,000. All of it secured using my Social Security number. All of it legally binding my future to his failing corporate illusion. I leaned closer to the screen. As a forensic auditor, I know opening a fraudulent line of credit is only the first step of a financial heist. The thief must also intercept the physical plastic and the initial billing statements to prevent the victim from discovering the crime prematurely. I clicked the cursor on the primary rewards account to view the administrative details. The primary residential address listed was a generic apartment complex I lived in during college. A clever choice. It established historical legitimacy for the automated banking algorithms. But the secondary mailing address, the physical destination where the bank shipped the newly minted credit cards, was different. I read the street name, a manicured cul-de-sac in Belle Meade. It was Aunt Susan's house. The revelation recontextualized the entire morning. I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. I scrolled back through the family group chat, bypassing Madison's shallow demands about bridesmaid dresses, and stopped at Susan's lengthy tirade. Susan had called me an ungrateful child. She accused me of lacking the grace to accept a wealthy father's generous attempts to make amends. She weaponized family loyalty, attempting to shame me into submission. I read the words again, stripping away the emotional manipulation. The text message was not the self-righteous scolding of a loyal sister. It was the desperate panic of a federal accomplice. Susan knew Richard was bankrupt. She knew he stole my identity to fund his fake corporate gala. She allowed him to use her mailbox to intercept the stolen credit cards. Her gaslighting in the group chat was designed to force me into compliance before I could discover the financial ruins they were building in my name. If I simply surrendered the wedding to Richard, if I accepted the ballroom upgrade and the luxury event planners without asking questions, I would never look at the invoices. I would never see the credit reports until it was too late. Susan was not protecting family. She was protecting a crime ring. The phone vibrated in my palm, replacing the text thread with an incoming call. The screen displayed my mother's name. I answered on the first ring. "Hello, Mom." A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. "Nevaeh, please tell me you are not fighting with your aunt again." My mother sounded fragile. She spent her entire adult life working double shifts at a diner, wearing orthopedic shoes, and carrying the weight of Richard's abandonment. She survived by avoiding conflict by making herself small enough that the collateral damage of his choices would pass over her. "I am not fighting with Susan," I said. "Susan is having a one-sided argument." I heard the clatter of dishes in the background. My mother was likely standing in her small kitchen, wringing a dish towel between her hands. "He just wants to help pay for the wedding, Nevaeh. Susan says he is trying to give you a beautiful reception. Why can we not just let him do it? It would make everything so much easier." Easier for who? "Easier for everyone," she pleaded. "If you keep pushing him away, he will find a way to make it miserable. You know how he gets when he is denied what he wants. Just let them attend. Let him pay for the cake. We can sit at our own table and ignore them." A familiar ache settled in my chest. My mother was displaying the classic symptom of long-term conditioning. She believed enduring mistreatment was safer than enforcing a boundary. She thought surrendering a piece of my life to Richard would satisfy his appetite. I looked at the glowing monitor displaying the $80,000 in fraudulent debt. Surrendering would not satisfy him. It would only grant him the authorization to destroy me. I could not tell her about the identity theft. Not yet. The information would shatter her fragile peace. She would panic, and panic creates unpredictable variables. I needed to control the flow of information until the trap was perfectly set. "I am handling the situation, Mom," I told her gently. My voice projected calm assurance. "I need you to do one thing for me. Do not answer any calls from Susan, Richard, or Victoria. If they reach out, let it go to voicemail. But what if they show up at my house? They will not, I promised. They are too focused on me right now. Just lock your doors and enjoy your evening. I have everything under control." I ended the call before she could offer another concession. I placed the phone back onto the granite counter. I turned my attention back to the laptop. The digital perimeter of my wedding required a final inspection. Richard's fake entity, Apex Event Planning, had already attempted to cancel the florist. I needed to ensure the remaining vendors were secure. I logged into my email and drafted a succinct, formal notice. I addressed it to the caterer, the photographer, the string quartet, and the rental company. I reiterated the strict verbal password protocol. I explicitly stated that Richard Baker, Victoria Baker, and Susan Hayes were unauthorized individuals. Any communication from them or from Apex Holdings was to be ignored and reported directly to me. I sent the emails. The digital wall was reinforced. Next, I began the meticulous process of building the physical file, the auditor's dossier. I connected my laptop to the wireless printer sitting on the home office desk in the next room. I initiated a print sequence for the Experian credit report highlighting the 3 fraudulent accounts. I printed the state business registry documents proving Apex Holdings was insolvent. I printed the forged Arrington Estate venue upgrade contract, clearly showing the altered guest list and the electronic signature stamp. I walked into the office and gathered the warm sheets of paper from the output tray. The mechanical whir of the printer provided a steady, rhythmic soundtrack to my task. I retrieved a fresh manila folder from the filing cabinet. I placed the uncashed $30,000 corporate check inside the front cover. I layered the forged contracts, the canceled floral email, the business registry findings, and the credit reports behind the check. I picked up my red felt tip pen. I annotated the margins of the printed pages. I drew connecting lines between Susan's address on the credit report and Susan's demanding text messages in the group chat. I linked the timing of the bakery ambush to the timestamp on the forged venue upgrade. I reduced my father's elaborate, desperate scheme into a clear, undeniable chain of evidence. I closed the manila folder. The thick cardboard felt substantial in my hands. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was a loaded weapon. Luke appeared in the doorway of the office. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me organize the desk. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Luke asked. "I found more than I expected," I replied. I tapped the top of the manila folder. I found the end of the line. Before Luke could respond, my cell phone vibrated from the kitchen island. The sharp sound echoed down the short hallway. I walked back into the kitchen and picked up the device. I expected another frantic message from the group chat. I expected another plea from my mother. I looked at the notification banner. The message did not come from Susan. It did not come from Victoria or Madison. It came from an unknown number, but the signature at the end of the text required no introduction. The message contained 2 concise sentences. "Looking forward to celebrating my little girl. See you at the rehearsal dinner. Richard." He bypassed the proxies. He dropped the intermediaries. He was announcing his arrival, assuming the psychological pressure from the family machine had softened my defenses. He believed the grand ballroom was waiting. He believed the fraudulent credit lines were secure. He believed he was walking into a triumphant corporate gala where he would play the starring role. He did not know I had already rerouted the venue. He did not know I had secured the vendors. And he certainly did not know about the red ink waiting for him inside the manila folder. I did not reply to the text message. I simply locked the screen. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening. I had exactly 4 days to prepare the reception he truly deserved. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed with stark white numbers. 2 a.m. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady, even breathing of Luke sleeping beside me. The text message from Richard remained branded in my thoughts. "Looking forward to celebrating my little girl." The words did not align with the reality of the situation. A man does not commit federal identity theft, forge legal contracts, and hijack a venue simply to show up and eat cake. The math was wrong. The equation remained unbalanced. I had uncovered the stolen credit lines and the basic insolvency of his company, but I still lacked the true motive. Risking a felony conviction requires a catalyst. There was a missing variable, a specific reason he chose this exact moment to force his way into my life. I threw back the quilt and slipped out of bed. My bare feet made no sound against the hardwood floor as I walked down the short hallway toward the kitchen. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the ambient amber glow of the city streetlights filtering through the blinds. I did not turn on the overhead fixtures. I preferred the shadows. They matched the nature of the work I was about to do. I reached the kitchen island and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I retrieved the manila folder. The thick cardboard contained the forged venue contract, the canceled florist email, and the Experian credit reports. I pulled out the $30,000 corporate check and set it onto the cool granite surface. I opened my work laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue light across my face. I picked up my favorite red felt tip pen, the instrument I use every day to mark discrepancies, to circle lies, and to dissect corporate fraud. I uncapped it and placed a blank legal pad next to the keyboard. The genre of my own life had shifted. This was no longer a story about a bride dealing with toxic, boundary-stomping relatives. This was a financial thriller, and the antagonist was currently operating under the assumption that his victim was asleep. I focused my attention on the $30,000 check. The memo line read, "Corporate Retreat Gala." Earlier, I deduced he was attempting to wash corporate funds through my event. Now I needed to know the specific mechanics of the wash. I looked at the MICR line at the bottom of the check. The magnetic ink character recognition code contains the routing transit number and the specific account identifier. As an auditor, I know how to read the hidden architecture of a bank draft. I logged into a professional corporate intelligence database, a subscription service utilized by forensic accounting firms to trace obscured assets. I typed in the routing sequence and the entity name, Apex Holdings, LLC. The search engine processed the query. The rhythmic, soft hum of the laptop fan filled the silence of the room. It was a grounding sound, a familiar tempo that sharpened my focus. The results populated the screen. I did not hit a simple dead end. I hit a meticulously constructed wall of shell companies. I began tracing the financial arteries. I drew a box on the legal pad and wrote Apex Holdings. I followed the digital paper trail to the registered agent. The agent was a post office box in Delaware. The Delaware entity was managed by a limited partnership in Wyoming. The Wyoming partnership was tied to a commercial trust. The complexity of the structure was designed to exhaust casual inquiries. It was built to make creditors dizzy and attorneys frustrated. But I am not casual, and I do not get frustrated by numbers. I simply follow the red ink. I spent the next 2 hours unraveling the labyrinth. I cross-referenced the tax codes printed on the business check with the public filings of the subsidiary companies. I mapped the debt. Richard was not merely bankrupt. He was leveraged to the brink of catastrophic ruin. I uncovered a pending commercial foreclosure on his flagship real estate property in downtown Atlanta. The legal notice indicated the default deadline was less than 30 days away. If that specific property fell into foreclosure, the cross-collateralization clauses embedded in his other loans would trigger a domino effect. The banks would seize his remaining assets. He would lose his cars, his home in Belmead, and his country club membership. The illusion of the wealthy chief executive would evaporate overnight. He needed capital to halt the foreclosure. He required a substantial injection of liquidity, a bridge loan. I opened a new browser tab. I searched industry news archives, business journals, and venture capital press releases, filtering the results for any mention of Apex Holdings within the last 90 days. On page 3 of the search results, I found a brief article from an obscure financial newsletter. The headline detailed a potential strategic partnership. Apex Holdings was reportedly courting a private equity firm for a multi-million-dollar restructuring package. The private equity firm was Vanguard Capital. The lead partner managing the acquisition was a man named Marcus Sterling. I stopped typing. I leaned back in the stool. The cold granite of the island pressed against my forearms. The puzzle snapped into perfect, devastating focus. Marcus Sterling and his investment board required proof of operational stability before they handed over millions of dollars to a struggling firm. They needed to see a thriving executive. They needed to see a man firmly in control of his empire, his legacy, and his family. Richard could not host these investors at his corporate offices. The staff was likely operating on a skeleton crew, the morale undoubtedly abysmal. He could not host them at his country club because his membership dues were likely in arrears. He needed a pristine, highly controlled environment, a stage where the lighting was flawless, the food was decadent, and he was the undisputed center of attention. A place where he could project the ultimate image of success and reliability. He needed my wedding. The pieces of the cover story fell into place. The forced 200 guest list was never about family friends. It was a roster of potential investors and business marks. The grand ballroom upgrade and the prime beef dinner were props designed to mimic a high-end corporate gala. He cast himself as the benevolent, wealthy patriarch. He cast Victoria as the elegant, supportive hostess. and he cast me as the silent, grateful prop standing in a white dress to legitimize his illusion of stability. The $30,000 check was the final piece of the tax manipulation. He planned to submit the entire wedding invoice to the IRS as a deductible business expense, writing off the cost of his own con job. He engineered this elaborate stage play using my stolen identity to fund the initial deposits, planning to secure the bailout loan from Marcus Sterling, and then leave me holding the fraudulent credit card debt when the music finally stopped. I looked at the flowchart on the legal pad. The red lines connected every lie, every forged signature, and every hijacked vendor. The sheer calculation of his strategy removed any lingering trace of familial obligation I might have subconsciously harbored. A father who abandons his child is a tragedy. A father who returns 18 years later to financially cannibalize that same child is a predator. I picked up the red pen. I wrote the name Marcus Sterling at the top of the legal pad. I circled the name twice, pressing the felt tip hard enough to bleed through the yellow paper. Richard believed I was a naive bride stressing over bridesmaid dresses and floral arrangements. He thought the group chat gaslighting from Aunt Susan was working. He had no idea I was sitting in the dark, holding the architectural blueprints to his destruction. If Richard wanted to use my life milestone as a corporate networking event, I decided I would oblige him. I would give him the exact stage he engineered. But I would dictate the script. He texted me that he would be at the rehearsal dinner. He was bringing his entourage. He intended to use the Friday evening dinner as the pilot episode of his grand production, a warm-up act to dazzle Marcus Sterling and the Vanguard Capital Board before the main event on Saturday. I closed the laptop. The screen faded to black, plunging the kitchen back into the amber shadows of the streetlights. I gathered the documents, placing the legal pad and the flowchart inside the manila folder. I slid the thick cardboard back into the bottom drawer of the desk and locked it. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The rehearsal dinner was no longer just a meal to practice walking down an aisle. It was the ground zero of a financial war. And I was going to serve a course my father would never forget. The pale gray light of early morning began to filter through the horizontal blinds of the apartment. I remained seated at the kitchen island. The digital clock on the microwave shifted to 6 in the morning. I had not slept. The exhaustion that should have clouded my thinking was entirely absent, replaced by a hyper-vigilant focus. The architecture of a federal crime lay scattered across the granite countertop in front of me. I picked up the physical corporate check one more time. The paper felt thick between my fingers. The sum of $30,000 printed on the center line represented a glaring mathematical impossibility. During my midnight audit, I established Apex Holdings was insolvent. The company faced imminent commercial foreclosure. The operating accounts were drained. A business lacking liquidity cannot issue a legitimate 5-figure draft without triggering an immediate bank reversal. The check was designed to bounce unless Richard found a synthetic method to fund the account just long enough to clear the transaction. I looked at the printed Experian credit report detailing the fraudulent accounts opened in my name. The 3 distinct lines of credit carried a combined balance nearing $80,000. A new, chilling hypothesis formed in my mind. I needed to verify the chronological timeline of the debt. I logged into the secure portals for the compromised credit accounts, utilizing the password recovery protocols connected to the fraudulent email address Richard engineered. As the actual owner of the Social Security number, bypassing his flimsy digital security took less than 4 minutes. The transaction ledgers loaded on my screen. I did not find luxury purchases. I did not find charges for designer suits or expensive dinners. I found a series of direct wire transfers. The high-tier rewards account showed a maximum capacity cash advance executed 10 days prior. The funds were wired directly to the primary operating account of Apex Holdings. The personal loan displayed a similar outbound trajectory. The true nature of the betrayal crystallized. The $30,000 check sitting on my counter was not corporate money. It was my money. Richard initiated high-interest cash advances against the illicit credit lines he opened in my name. He deposited those stolen funds into his failing corporate account to artificially inflate his liquidity. Then he drafted the wedding check from the corporate ledger. He executed a textbook money laundering sequence. By washing the stolen funds through Apex Holdings, he generated a paper trail that would allow him to claim the wedding as a deductible corporate retreat. He intended to host his private equity investors on my stolen credit, secure a multi-million-dollar bailout using the manufactured optics of success, and manipulate his tax liabilities simultaneously. When the music finally stopped, I would be left holding the crippling high-interest debt. He would walk away clean, his empire restored, his hands washed of the wreckage. How did a man who vanished nearly 2 decades ago possess the precise personal data required to bypass modern banking verification algorithms? My memory drifted back to a stale, windowless courtroom in downtown Nashville 18 years ago. My mother sat at the plaintiff table, her hands trembling as she requested standard child support. Richard countered with an aggressive motion for primary custody. He did not want to raise me. He filed the motion simply to terrorize my mother into dropping her financial requests. During the discovery phase of that bitter litigation, the court mandated the exchange of vital identification records: my Social Security card, my original birth certificate, and my medical history were entered into the legal repository. Richard obtained copies of everything. He eventually dropped the custody suit and disappeared, leaving the state to avoid the garnishment orders. He left the child, but he kept the paperwork. He retained my 9-digit federal identifier, storing it in a file cabinet for 18 years, waiting for the asset to mature. The sheer patience of his predation caused a cold sensation to radiate down my arms. Yet possessing a Social Security number is only half the equation. Banks require physical mailing addresses to ship the tangible plastic cards. If the cards were mailed to my actual apartment, I would have intercepted the fraud immediately. If he mailed them to his own residence, the discrepancy in the public record algorithms would have triggered an identity verification hold. I looked back down at the secondary address printed on the credit report, the manicured cul-de-sac in Belle Meade, Aunt Susan's house. The geographic location was a calculated tactical choice. Belle Meade is one of the highest income zip codes in the state of Tennessee. Financial institutions utilize automated underwriting software that weighs regional demographics. An application originating from a prestigious zip code receives expedited approval and higher credit limits. Susan did not merely look the other way. She provided the physical safe harbor for the heist. She allowed Richard to list her residence on the applications. When the envelopes bearing my name arrived in her brass mailbox, she retrieved them. She handed the plastic cards to her brother. Susan aided and abetted identity theft. I picked up my red felt-tip pen. I pressed the point against the crisp white paper of the credit report, drawing a slow, deliberate circle around Susan's street address. I pressed hard. The red ink bled through the porous fibers of the page, staining the wood grain of the desk underneath. I did not scream. I did not throw the coffee mug against the wall. Outward displays of rage are inefficient. They burn energy that should be conserved for the execution of consequences. The time for investigation concluded. The time for documentation commenced. I began assembling the physical framework of their destruction. I took a fresh stack of printer paper and fed it into the machine. I methodically printed every wire transfer receipt demonstrating the cash advances. I printed the corresponding deposit records for Apex Holdings. I printed the forged electronic signature from the Arrington Estate venue portal. I organized the pages in chronological order, creating a seamless, indisputable narrative timeline. I opened a blank word processing document and drafted an executive summary. I treated the project exactly like a corporate audit file prepared for a federal prosecutor. I detailed the violation of Title 18, Section 1028 of the United States Code, which governs fraud and related activity in connection with identification documents. I listed Richard Baker as the primary perpetrator. I listed Susan Hayes as the accessory. I punched holes along the left margins of the pages and secured them inside a heavy-duty binding clip. I slid the entire bound dossier into a rigid white envelope. I sealed the flap. I ran my thumbnail along the edge, creating a sharp, definitive crease. The trap was fully constructed. The snare possessed steel teeth. Luke walked into the kitchen, his hair sleep-tousled. He wore gray sweatpants and a plain white shirt. He looked at the sealed white envelope resting on the island, then up at my face. He recognized the shift in my posture. "Are we calling the police?" Luke asked. His voice was calm, anchoring me to the present moment. "Not yet," I replied. "Police officers take reports. They file paperwork. They operate within a slow, bureaucratic timeline. Richard needs to face a swifter, more precise calculation." I picked up the white envelope. The weight of the paper represented my autonomy, my future, and my retribution. "He invited his venture capital marks to our rehearsal dinner tonight," I told Luke. "He intends to use the evening as a pilot episode for his grand corporate production. He wants to stand at the head of the table and project power." Luke poured a cup of coffee from the carafe. "And what are we going to do?" "We are going to let him order the most expensive items on the menu," I said. "We are going to let him drink the finest bourbon. We will let him gather his audience and raise his glass. And then we will introduce a sudden, catastrophic deficit into his ledger." I walked past the kitchen island toward the bedroom to prepare for the day. The phantom RSVP, the bakery ambush, the canceled florist, and the stolen identity all converged on a single point in time: Friday evening. The restaurant was booked. The guest list was set. The investors were arriving. Richard engineered a stage play to save his failing empire. He forgot that the lead actress possessed the power to rewrite the script and burn the theater to the ground. The heavy oak doors of the Italian restaurant swung shut behind us. Luke and I stood in the quiet, carpeted hallway leading to the coat check. The ambient noise of the private dining room, the clinking silverware, and the low hum of conversation was muffled by the thick acoustic panels. We caught up to the present moment. The opening scene had concluded. I had just handed the maitre d' my credit card, explicitly instructing him to separate the 12 uninvited investors onto a distinct check, leaving Richard responsible for a 4-figure bill he could not cover. I retrieved my wool trench coat from the attendant. The satisfying weight of the garment settled across my shoulders. I felt an unexpected sense of calm. The anxiety of anticipation was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp execution of a tactical strike. The heavy oak doors burst open. The brass handles slammed against the wall stops with a jarring thud. Richard stepped into the hallway. The custom charcoal suit no longer looked impeccable. The fabric pulled tightly across his chest as he breathed in ragged, shallow gasps. The benevolent patriarch facade had completely evaporated. His face was a mask of raw, unfiltered panic. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He did not look at Luke. He focused the entirety of his desperation onto me. "What exactly are you doing, Nevaeh?" His voice was no longer the booming, confident baritone he used to command the dining room. It was a venomous hiss, stripped of any residual paternal warmth. "I am leaving," I replied. My tone remained perfectly level. "The dinner is concluded." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You cannot leave that bill on the table. Those men are the executive board of Vanguard Capital. Do you have any concept of what is at stake here?" "I understand exactly what is at stake," I said. I stepped to the side, maintaining my distance. "You invited 12 guests to a private function without authorization. You ordered reserve bourbon and premium steaks. You are the host. The host pays the tab." Richard's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. The knuckles turned a stark, bloodless white. "You know I cannot clear that transaction. You need to walk back in there, hand the waiter your card, and apologize for the misunderstanding. You will tell them it was a logistical error." I looked at him with total, chilling apathy. I do not subsidize fraudulent corporate networking events. The word fraudulent landed like a physical blow. A flicker of realization crossed his eyes. He recognized the specific vocabulary. He understood that I perceived the architecture of his scheme, even if he did not yet grasp the extent of my knowledge. The panic morphed into a dangerous, cornered aggression. He abandoned the attempt to persuade me. He resorted to the only currency he truly valued: leverage. "Listen to me very carefully," Richard whispered. He leaned in, the smell of expensive bourbon rolling off his breath, failing to mask the sour, metallic scent of pure desperation. "You are going to fix this. You will cover that bill, and tomorrow you are going to put on that white dress and you are going to let me walk you down the aisle. You will smile for the photographer. You will pose with Marcus Sterling and the board members. You will play the role of the grateful daughter." "And if I decline your casting call?" I asked. He sneered. The expression distorted his features, revealing the predatory nature beneath the tailoring. "If you humiliate me tomorrow, I will ensure you never work in the financial sector again. I still possess industry connections in this city. I know the managing partners at your auditing firm. I will initiate a smear campaign so vicious your professional reputation will be reduced to ash. I will drag your name through the mud until you are unemployable." The threat hung in the quiet hallway. He was utilizing the classic tactic of an insolvent bully: project overwhelming power to conceal overwhelming weakness. He believed his status as an older, established executive would intimidate a younger woman. He assumed I valued my career more than my autonomy. He needed the optics of the wedding ceremony. Without the visual proof of family stability and patriarchal control, Marcus Sterling would pull the bailout funding. If Vanguard Capital withdrew their term sheet, the commercial foreclosure on the Atlanta property would execute. The cross-collateralization clauses would trigger. His empire would collapse, and the federal investigators would begin examining the rubble. He was not merely fighting for his ego. He was fighting to stay out of a federal penitentiary. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his intensity. I simply adjusted the collar of my wool coat. "I understand your position, Richard," I said softly. He exhaled a sharp breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. He misinterpreted my calm demeanor as submission. He believed his extortion successfully reestablished his dominance. He thought he broke the rebellious daughter and secured his necessary prop. "Do not be late tomorrow," he commanded, adjusting his silk tie to reassert his authority. "The photographer arrives at 3. Be ready." "See you tomorrow, Richard," I replied. I turned and walked toward the exit. Luke fell into step beside me, his presence a silent, impenetrable guard. We pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the crisp Nashville evening. We did not speak until we reached the car. Luke unlocked the doors. We slid into the leather seats. The engine hummed to life. Luke looked across the center console. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," I answered. I buckled my seatbelt. "He threatened your career," Luke noted. His jaw tightened. "He threatened a ghost," I said. "A man drowning in his own debt cannot destroy anyone. He is grasping at water." I stared out the passenger window as we navigated the city streets. Richard believed he won the negotiation. He believed he secured his stage and his audience. He intended to show up at the venue tomorrow, dressed in a custom tuxedo, ready to walk me down the aisle and cement his fraudulent narrative. He had no idea he just threatened a woman who already held his execution orders. The white envelope containing the meticulous documentation of his identity theft, his money laundering, and Susan's complicity was safely locked inside the glove compartment of my car. I did not intend to hand it to the police immediately. Filing a standard report would allow Richard the opportunity to hire legal counsel and control the narrative. I intended to deliver the consequences in person within the very environment he tried to hijack. I required absolute security to execute the final phase of the operation. Richard proved he was willing to utilize aggressive, confrontational tactics. If he realized I was not complying with his script tomorrow afternoon, he would attempt to force his way into the venue. I could not rely on standard event staff to manage a desperate, cornered felon. When we arrived back at the apartment, I did not go to sleep. I opened my laptop and navigated to a private security contracting service. I bypassed the standard event bouncers and selected the option for off-duty law enforcement personnel. I hired 2 uniformed Nashville police officers to stand post at the perimeter of the Arrington estate. I filled out the necessary logistical forms. I typed a strict, unyielding trespass authorization directive. I explicitly listed Richard Baker, Victoria Baker, Madison and Susan Hayes as hostile, unauthorized individuals. The directive stated that any attempt by these specific persons to breach the venue was to be met with immediate physical removal and potential arrest for criminal trespass. I uploaded digital photographs of each family member pulled from their social media profiles to ensure flawless identification. I submitted the payment. The confirmation receipt appeared in my inbox. The physical perimeter was secure. The digital perimeter was locked. The trap was fully constructed, bait and snare perfectly aligned. I walked into the bedroom. Luke was already asleep, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet space. I lay down next to him, staring at the ceiling shadows. Tomorrow was my wedding day. I intended to walk down the aisle and marry the man I loved. But before the music started, I had an appointment to keep. The arrogant patriarch was going to breach the bridal suite, expecting a compliant daughter ready to participate in his illusion. He was going to reach for my arm. I was going to hand him an envelope. The morning of my wedding arrived not with the frantic energy of a celebration, but with the quiet discipline of an audit concluding. Dawn broke over Nashville, casting a pale gray light through the apartment blinds. I woke up before the alarm sounded. My mind was already categorizing the day into actionable phases. I did not feel the typical bridal arrangements regarding floral arrangements or seating charts. My focus was reserved entirely for risk management. Luke and I packed our garment bags and drove to the Arrington estate. The tires of our car crunched over the long gravel driveway leading up to the historic property. The autumn air felt crisp and deliberate. The venue grounds were serene, surrounded by ancient oak trees shedding their leaves onto the manicured lawns. A boutique hotel sat adjacent to the botanical gardens, serving as the preparation quarters for the bridal party. We parked near the lobby entrance. Before proceeding to our respective suites, I had a specific logistical appointment to fulfill. 2 men in dark blue uniforms stood near the reception desk, Officer Jenkins and Officer Clark. They wore tactical belts and carried the unmistakable posture of off-duty law enforcement personnel. I approached them, introduced myself, and handed over a stiff, laminated packet. "This is the perimeter defense protocol," I told them, keeping my voice low and even. Officer Jenkins opened the packet. The first page contained 4 high-resolution photographs printed in color. Richard, projecting his usual corporate arrogance. Victoria, looking polished and severe. Madison, displaying her characteristic boredom. Susan, her eyes sharp and judgmental. These 4 individuals represent a localized threat to the event I explained. They do not possess invitations. They are not on the guest registry. Under no circumstances are they permitted to cross the property line. Officer Clark studied the photographs. "What is the anticipated approach?" he asked. I outlined Richard's exact psychological profile. "The older man in the tailored suit is the primary antagonist," I said. "He will attempt to bypass you using authority. He will claim he is the father of the bride. He will state that he is financing this entire operation and threaten your employment if you deny him entry. Do not let his tailoring fool you. He is currently insolvent. He holds no financial authority over this venue. If he or his associates attempt to breach the perimeter, you have my signed trespass authorization to detain and remove them." Jenkins nodded, closing the folder and tucking it under his arm. "We understand the assignment, Miss Baker. Nobody gets past the lobby without your explicit clearance." I thanked them and walked toward the elevator. Luke carried my dress bag, his presence a steady grounding force amidst the tactical preparations. We rode up to the 4th floor in comfortable silence. We stepped into room 402. The bridal suite was spacious, decorated in soft, neutral tones, with a large vanity mirror sitting near the window. I closed the heavy wooden door behind us. I turned the brass deadbolt. The lock slid into the strike plate with a satisfying, heavy click. The sound represented a physical boundary. For 18 years, Richard operated under the assumption that he could walk in and out of my life whenever his financial needs dictated. The deadbolt signified the end of his unrestricted access. Mook set the garment bags onto the bed. He walked over to me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. He pulled me close. I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He smelled of cedar and clean cotton. He provided the exact equilibrium I required. He did not offer hollow reassurances. He offered quiet, unyielding strength. "I will see you at the end of the aisle," Luke said softly. He kissed my forehead, unlocked the door, and departed for the groom quarters down the hall. I secured the deadbolt once again. I was alone in the suite. The makeup artist and the hairstylist were scheduled to arrive in 30 minutes. I utilized the window of solitude to finalize the trap. I walked over to the vanity desk and pushed the decorative tissue boxes and cosmetic trays to the side. I opened my leather work tote and retrieved the manila folder. I spread the contents across the smooth glass surface of the desk. The final stage of my defense required physical documentation. During the previous afternoon, right before leaving for the Italian restaurant, I navigated the federal reporting portals. I formally submitted an identity theft affidavit to the Internal Revenue Service. Filing that specific federal document triggers an immediate freeze on the compromised tax identification number. It also flags the associated business entity for an internal revenue audit. Apex Holdings was now under the watchful eye of the federal government. I also finalized the digital police report detailing the fraudulent credit accounts, submitting the file to the Financial Crimes Division of the local precinct. The digital gears of justice were already turning. Richard was a walking ghost, entirely unaware that his financial life support was severed. I took the printed confirmation receipts for the IRS fraud forms and the completed police report. I layered them on top of the Experian credit summaries showing the stolen funds. I pulled the red felt tip pen from my tote bag. The squeak of the felt tip against the printer paper echoed in the quiet suite. I drew a thick red line under the federal tracking numbers. I circled the fake Belmead mailing address. I highlighted the $80,000 total deficit. The bright ink cut through the black and white text, looking like a ledger bleeding onto the glass desk. I folded the stack of annotated documents with precise, deliberate creases. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a premium white envelope. The paper was thick, textured, and pristine. It was the exact type of stationery designed to hold a joyous wedding announcement or a heartfelt letter of gratitude. I slid the folded documents inside. I sealed the flap. I pressed my thumbnail along the edge, running it from corner to corner, creating a sharp, permanent crease. The sleek white envelope rested on the vanity. It looked elegant. It held absolute destruction. A soft knock sounded at the suite door. The stylist team had arrived. I unlocked the deadbolt and allowed them entry. The room quickly filled with the scent of hairspray, the hum of curling irons, and the rustle of garment bags. The physical transformation began. My hair was pinned into a complex, elegant style. The makeup was applied with professional precision. I stepped into my wedding dress. The heavy silk settled against my skin, tailored to fit perfectly. I looked into the full-length mirror standing in the corner of the room. The reflection staring back did not belong to a victim. It did not belong to the terrified 10-year-old girl who watched her father steal her college tuition. I saw a forensic auditor, draped in white silk, operating an impenetrable perimeter defense system. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 2 hours remained until the ceremony. The final phase of the operation was approaching. Richard believed he held the ultimate leverage. He believed his vicious threat in the restaurant hallway secured my absolute compliance. He was currently dressing in his custom tuxedo, adjusting his silk tie, preparing to arrive at the estate. He intended to bypass the security checkpoint by utilizing his sheer arrogance. He planned to march upstairs, breach this very room, and claim his necessary prop for his investor audience. He was walking directly into the snare. The trap was perfectly set, and I was simply waiting for the predator to step on the trigger. The digital clock on the suite wall shifted to 2 in the afternoon. Exactly 120 minutes remained until the string quartet would begin playing in the botanical gardens below. The bridal suite buzzed with a low, comfortable energy. My 3 bridesmaids moved around the spacious room, gathering their belongings and slipping into their sage green dresses. Lauren stood directly behind me, securing the delicate ivory tulle of my veil with a row of silver hairpins. I met Lauren during my first year of accounting exams. When my bank account was overdrawn and the stress of the licensing board threatened to break my resolve, she let me sleep on her vintage velvet couch for 3 months. She never asked for rent. She never kept a running tally of favors. Lauren represented the family I chose, the kind of loyalty built on mutual respect rather than transactional obligation. Maya poured glasses of sparkling cider near the window overlooking the estate. The sweet, sharp scent of green apple mixed with the fresh eucalyptus arranged in vases on the mantel. The atmosphere felt insulated, warm, and secure. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The heavy silk of my wedding dress fell in perfect, structured lines to the floor. The tailoring was precise. Every element of the day felt ordered and exact. Then, the heavy wooden door of the suite swung inward. It did not open with a polite knock or a hesitant push. It pivoted on its brass hinges with enough force to bounce off the rubber wall stop. The sudden, jarring thud silenced the room instantly. Maya froze, with the cider bottle suspended over a crystal flute. Lauren dropped her hands from my veil. Richard stepped over the threshold. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo. The dark wool caught the light the break of the trousers, falling perfectly over polished black Oxfords. His silver hair was swept back, executing the visual role of the distinguished wealthy patriarch to perfection. Flanking him on either side were his highly styled proxies. Victoria wore an emerald evening gown, far too formal for an afternoon garden ceremony, her chin tilted upward in a posture of practiced superiority. Madison trailed a half-step behind, chewing a piece of peppermint gum, her eyes scanning the room with unfiltered boredom. The sharp, overwhelming scent of sandalwood and clove flooded the suite, erasing the eucalyptus. My mind processed the breach in a fraction of a second. The perimeter defense protocol I instituted with the off-duty police officers was airtight against standard intruders, but Richard did not utilize standard tactics. I realized exactly how he bypassed the security checkpoint in the lobby. He did not argue with the officers. He outmaneuvered them with manufactured authority. He likely marched through the front doors, pointed at the grand ballroom, and identified himself as the majority stakeholder of the estate management group, commanding the staff to prepare for his corporate guests. Law enforcement personnel are trained to handle unruly trespassers. They are not equipped to audit the complex ownership structure of a private venue on a Saturday afternoon. He utilized a sophisticated, high-risk bluff to paralyze the chain of command and walk straight past the guards. He stood in the center of the suite. He carried a small, clear plastic box containing a white orchid corsage, a cheap, transactional prop meant to symbolize his paternal blessing. His eyes swept over Lauren, Maya, and Jenna. He did not offer a greeting. He dismissed my closest friends as if they were hired catering staff, taking up unnecessary space in his private green room. He turned his focus entirely onto me. He expected to find a nervous, compliant bride broken by the vicious threat he delivered in the restaurant hallway the night before. He believed his promise to destroy my auditing career had successfully eradicated my resistance. "It is time to stop this nonsense," Nevaeh Richard announced. His voice resonated through the quiet room, dripping with a thick, patronizing authority. He spoke to me the same way a senior executive speaks to a junior analyst who made a minor clerical error. He projected the illusion that my boundaries were simply a childish tantrum he was generously choosing to overlook. "I am walking you down that aisle," he continued, taking another step forward. "The photographer is waiting downstairs. You need to put on this corsage and come with us right now. Think of how this looks to my investors out there." He laid his true motive bare in front of an audience. He did not mention my future. He did not mention Luke. He did not offer a single word regarding my happiness. The entire orchestrated invasion hinged on a single variable: his investors. Marcus Sterling and the Vanguard Capital Board were likely sitting in the reserved seating section, waiting for the patriarch to deliver the visual proof of his stability. Richard extended his arm. The gold cufflink on his sleeve gleamed under the recessed ceiling lights. He reached for my forearm, attempting to physically corral me into his narrative, to steer me out of the door and down the stairs to his waiting audience. Lauren took a sudden protective step forward, her protective instincts flaring. I raised my left hand just an inch, opening my palm, a silent, subtle signal. Lauren held her ground, trusting my command of the situation. I looked at the outstretched hand of the man who stole my college tuition, the hand that forged my signature on a venue contract, the hand that authorized the theft of my identity to wash $80,000 of fraudulent debt through a failing corporate shell. I did not flinch. I did not cry. Tears are a currency I stopped spending on him 2 decades ago. I did not yell, because raising your voice is a symptom of losing control, and I held every single thread of power in the room. As his fingers brushed the air millimeters from my skin, I executed a single fluid motion. I took one precise step backward. The heavy silk of my wedding dress sighed a delicate, crisp rustle that echoed in the dead silence of the suite. The distance I created was small, perhaps 12 inches, but it represented an insurmountable, permanent chasm. His hand grasped nothing but empty air. He stood frozen, his arm awkwardly suspended in the space between us. The physical rejection fractured his projected authority. The atmosphere in the room flatlined. The ambient hum of the air conditioning unit seemed to amplify. Victoria shifted her weight, her emerald gown brushing against the doorframe, a sudden flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Madison stopped chewing her gum. Richard slowly lowered his arm. The confident curve of his jaw tightened. His eyes darkened, the initial shock of the rejection hardening into a sharp, cornered hostility. He opened his mouth to issue another command to escalate his intimidation tactics in front of my friends. He never got the chance to speak. I broke eye contact. I turned my body away from him, a deliberate dismissal of his presence. I walked the 2 short paces to the glass vanity desk sitting near the window. The sleek, crisp white envelope rested exactly where I left it. The sharp crease along the seal caught the afternoon sunlight. It looked like a simple piece of premium stationery. It was, in reality, a loaded snare mechanism. I reached out and placed my fingers against the smooth paper. The weight of the envelope grounded me. It held the federal tracking numbers, the annotated credit reports, and the printed evidence of his impending ruin. I picked up the envelope. The time for setting the trap had concluded. The predator was standing in the center of the room, expecting a vulnerable target. It was time to close the steel teeth. I turned back to face the center of the room. The sleek, white envelope rested in my open palm. Richard still stood near the edge of the patterned rug, his posture rigid. The physical rejection of my backward step had thrown his tactical rhythm off balance. He expected me to argue. He expected me to plead, to offer excuses, or to tearfully submit to his demands. He did not expect me to hand him a piece of paper. "I am not giving you my arm, Richard," I said. My voice carried no inflection. It held no anger, no sadness, and no fear. It was the flat, precise cadence of an auditor reading a final balance sheet. I extended my hand, presenting the premium stationery. "I am giving you this," I told him. "Open it." Richard looked from my face to the white envelope. The sneer returned to his mouth, a defensive reflex designed to reassert his dominance. He assumed he understood the contents. A desperate man perceives the world entirely through the lens of his own needs. He believed the envelope contained a heartfelt, submissive letter of apology. He thought I spent the morning writing out my insecurities, asking for his forgiveness for causing a scene at the rehearsal dinner, begging him to accept me back into his good graces. He believed he had won. He stepped forward and snatched the envelope from my hand. The harsh, violent sound of tearing paper echoed through the dead silence of the bridal suite. He ripped the sealed flap with an aggressive flick of his wrist, pulling the thick stack of folded documents out into the ambient light. He unfolded the pages. The sneer vanished. I watched the exact moment his reality fractured. His eyes, previously locked in a glare of arrogant authority, dropped to the top page of the dossier. His gaze began to dart rapidly across the text. He saw the Experian credit report. He saw the itemized list of high-interest cash advances. He saw the routing numbers for the wire transfers deposited directly into the operating account of Apex Holdings. But it was not the printed numbers that stopped his breath. It was the heavy, bleeding red ink. The bright felt-tip circles highlighted every single fraudulent transaction. The red arrows traced the money from my stolen Social Security number directly to his failing corporate shell. The ink served as a visual map of his felony, drawn by the daughter he assumed was too naive to understand corporate finance. His hands began to tremble. The slight involuntary vibration caused the edges of the printer paper to flutter. "You opened 3 lines of credit using my Social Security number," I stated. The quiet atmosphere of the room amplified the sharp articulation of every consonant. "You generated $80,000 in synthetic liquidity to wash through Apex Holdings. You intended to use the stolen funds to stage a fake corporate gala disguised as my wedding reception, secure your bailout loan from Vanguard Capital, and leave me holding the debt." Victoria shifted her weight behind him. The aggressive posture she carried into the room dissolved. She leaned forward, peering over his shoulder to read the documents clutched in his shaking hands. She saw the red ink. She saw the federal header printed at the top of the second page. "That is federal identity theft, Richard I." Continued my gaze locked onto his panicked eyes. "It is a violation of Title 18, Section 1028 of the United States Code. The penalty carries a maximum sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Victoria let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her complexion a pale, chalky white. She understood the implications of the red ink immediately. The illusion of the wealthy country club lifestyle was evaporating in real time, replaced by the terrifying prospect of asset seizures and criminal indictments. "And you did not execute the heist alone," I added, shifting my focus to the third page of the dossier he was holding. I circled the secondary mailing address on the credit applications. "Aunt Susan allowed you to intercept the stolen plastic at her residence in Belle Meade. That makes her an active accessory to federal fraud." Madison, standing near the doorframe, finally stopped chewing her peppermint gum. She looked from her mother's terrified expression to Richard's trembling hands. The boredom vanished, replaced by the distinct, uncomfortable realization that her luxury German sedan and her designer lifestyle were funded by a criminal enterprise. Richard opened his mouth. He attempted to pull oxygen into his lungs, but his chest barely moved. The blustering, arrogant chief executive shattered completely. He was no longer a patriarch issuing commands. He was a cornered criminal staring at his own execution orders. "You cannot prove any of this," Richard stammered. His voice was a thin, raspy whisper, stripped of all its baritone confidence. "This is a misunderstanding. These are legitimate corporate accounts. You are misinterpreting the ledgers." "I do not misinterpret ledgers," I replied. "I expose them for a living. I am a forensic auditor, Richard. Did you honestly believe you could build a house of cards using my name and I would never check the foundation?" He stared at the red ink bleeding through the paper. His mind scrambled to construct a defense, to find a narrative loophole he could exploit. He was accustomed to intimidating subordinates, manipulating vendors, and bullying family members. He did not know how to negotiate with a woman who held absolute, unyielding proof of his guilt. He looked up from the documents. The panic in his eyes morphed into a raw, feral desperation. He realized the threat he issued the night before in the restaurant hallway was entirely useless. He could not ruin my auditing career. I possessed the power to initiate the complete destruction of his entire life. "Nevaeh," he started taking a slow, hesitant step toward me. The patronizing tone was gone, replaced by a pathetic, whining cadence. "You need to listen to me. You do not understand the pressure I am under. Apex Holdings is facing a massive commercial foreclosure. If I do not secure the bridge loan from Marcus Sterling this afternoon, the banks will seize everything. Victoria and I will lose the house." I had no other options. I was going to pay the credit cards off as soon as the funding cleared. I swear to you, I just needed a temporary bridge. He attempted to weaponize his own failure, framing his felony as an act of desperate survival. He wanted me to feel responsible for his impending ruin. He expected me to absorb the consequences of his incompetence, just as my mother had absorbed the consequences of his abandonment 18 years ago. A temporary bridge built on stolen identity is still theft, I said. Your financial mismanagement is not my responsibility. You stole my college tuition when I was 10 years old to fund a failure. You returned 18 years later to steal my future to fund another one. The silence in the room stretched taut, heavy with the weight of the undeniable truth. The bridesmaids stood perfectly still, witnessing the systematic dismantling of a toxic patriarch. Richard looked at the final page of the dossier. The page detailed the formal submission of the identity theft affidavit to the Internal Revenue Service. His breathing hitched. He recognized the federal tracking number printed at the bottom of the form. He knew what that specific document triggered: the Internal Revenue audit. Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. You filed the affidavit. I did not just print these documents for your review, I informed him, delivering the final, devastating blow. The credit lines are frozen. The funds you washed into Apex Holdings are flagged for suspicious activity. The accounts are locked. The color drained from his face entirely. The realization that his financial lifeline was severed hit him with physical force. He swayed slightly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the invisible collapse. But the trap possessed one final mechanism, a consequence far more immediate than a pending federal investigation. I looked at the digital clock on the suite wall. The seconds ticked away, aligning perfectly with the schedule I engineered. I turned my attention back to the cornered man clutching the white envelope. The time for negotiation was over. The countdown was about to begin. The narrative requires a seamless transition from the climax of the confrontation into the aftermath. The following text executes Part 12, adhering to your strict stylistic guidelines, maintaining deep poove, and escalating the tension without repeating specific banned words. Richard stood motionless. His mind scrambled to construct a new reality. I watched his eyes dart around the room, searching for a sympathetic audience. He looked at Lauren, Maya, and Jenna. My friends stared back with identical expressions of cold disdain. He found no harbor there. He turned his attention back to me. His jaw worked, the facial muscles clenching and unclenching as he prepared to deploy his signature tactic. He intended to weave his way out of the snare using alternative facts. He opened his mouth. He took a shallow breath, ready to spin a narrative where he was the victim of complex corporate misunderstandings. He prepared to tell me the bank made an administrative error, or that his accountants filed the wrong forms. He wanted to promise me a seat on his board of directors. He wanted to offer me a percentage of his non-existent profits. He never spoke the words. My gaze remained dead and calculating. I offered him a look devoid of any human empathy. An auditor does not argue with a fraudulent ledger. She simply presents the final balance. I did not just print these documents for your review, Richard, I said. My voice cut through his unformed excuses like a scalpel. The credit lines are frozen. The Internal Revenue Service fraud alert is active. The funds you funneled into your shell company are flagged for suspicious activity. The accounts are locked and inaccessible. He swallowed hard. The prominent Adam's apple in his throat bobbed. He processed the information, trying to find a loophole. He still believed he possessed one final lifeline. He thought he could salvage the situation by descending the stairs, walking into the garden, and charming Marcus Sterling. He assumed his charisma could overcome the frozen assets. If he could just maintain the illusion of the wealthy patriarch for a few more hours, he might secure a verbal commitment from the private equity board. I anticipated that specific calculation. I prepared a countermeasure for his final escape route. You are evaluating your odds with Vanguard Capital right now, I noted. You think you can walk down to the botanical gardens, shake Marcus Sterling by the hand, and smooth this over with expensive cigars and hollow promises? You think your investors will ignore rumors if you project enough confidence. His eyes narrowed. A faint glimmer of hope sparked in his expression. He thought I was merely guessing his strategy. I do not leave loose ends, I informed him. 30 minutes ago, a bonded courier arrived at the lobby of this estate. The courier carried 12 sealed folders. Those folders contained exact duplicates of the dossier you are currently holding, every wire transfer receipt, every forged signature, and every federal affidavit. The courier delivered those packages directly to the men sitting in your reserved seating section downstairs. The faint glimmer of hope extinguished, replaced by a profound, empty despair. Marcus Sterling is a risk management expert, I continued. Private equity firms do not invest capital into insolvent shell companies under federal investigation for identity theft. Sterling and his board members are reading your financial autopsy right this very second. Your funding is gone, your reputation is eradicated, your empire is reduced to ash. A physical transformation overtook him. The custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume draped over a collapsing frame. The silver hair swept back to project authority now seemed brittle. A single drop of sweat materialized at his left temple. The moisture caught the bright illumination of the vanity lights glistening against his pale skin. The drop traced a slow path down the side of his face, a visual manifestation of his ruined facade. I turned my head and looked at the digital clock mounted on the wall above the doorway. The red numbers shifted. The off-duty police officers standing post in the lobby possess their own set of instructions, I said, returning my focus to his terrified eyes. I notified them of your unauthorized presence right before you breached this room. They are currently walking up the main stairwell. They carry handcuffs. They hold a signed criminal trespass directive. Richard blinked, his mind struggling to process the speed of his destruction. You have exactly 60 seconds, I stated. You will turn around. You will walk out of this suite. You will utilize the rear service elevator at the end of the hall. You will exit this property, and you will never attempt to contact me again. If you linger in this hallway, or if you step one single foot toward that garden aisle, you will leave my wedding in the back of a squad car. The silence that followed was suffocating. The air in the room grew heavy thick with the scent of his failure. The overpowering cologne he wore no longer smelled like wealth. It smelled like decay. Victoria broke the paralysis. Her self-preservation instincts activated. She married Richard for the country club lifestyle, the designer handbags, and the illusion of prestige. She did not sign a marriage certificate to face federal conspiracy charges and asset forfeiture. The prospect of losing her freedom severed whatever loyalty she harbored for her husband. She lunged forward. Her manicured fingers dug into the dark wool of his tuxedo sleeve. "Richard, let us go," Victoria hissed. Her voice was shrill, tight with unfiltered terror. "We need to leave, right now." She pulled his arm, her emerald gown twisting around her legs. Madison backed away from the group, her face buried in her hands, her designer lifestyle dissolving before her eyes. Richard resisted the pull for a fraction of a second. His pride demanded a final stand. He could not accept that a daughter he viewed as a disposable asset had engineered his total defeat. He lifted his hand and threw the stack of annotated documents onto the glass surface of the vanity desk. The paper slapped against the hard material. He attempted to muster a parting shot. He wanted to deliver a threat that would leave a lasting wound. He opened his mouth, searching for the vocabulary to reclaim a sliver of his dignity. "You will regret doing this to your own family," he managed to say. The delivery was a catastrophic failure. His voice shook, the words trembled, stripped of all resonance. It was not a threat. It was a whimper. I checked the clock on the wall. 40 seconds, I replied calmly. The countdown severed his remaining pride. The reality of the approaching police officers shattered his paralysis. He broke. He turned away from me. His polished black Oxfords scraped clumsily against the patterned rug. Victoria shoved him toward the doorframe, her panic propelling them both forward. Madison scurried out of the room first, desperate to escape the impending law enforcement arrival. Richard stumbled across the threshold, a broken man, fleeing the sanctuary he attempted to desecrate. Victoria pulled the heavy wooden door shut behind them. The brass hinges groaned, followed by the dull, resonant thud of the door meeting the jamb. The suite fell into a profound, golden quiet. The scent of sandalwood and clove began to dissipate, retreating back into the hallway where it belonged. The threat was neutralized. The predator was banished. But the ceremony was still waiting, and the seats he intended to fill were now empty. I turned to my friends, smoothing the silk of my dress. The final chapter of the day was just beginning. The bridal suite finally exhaled. The heavy wooden door remained shut, sealing the hallway and the retreating footsteps of a ruined man. The oppressive scent of sandalwood dissipated, replaced once again by the clean fragrance of eucalyptus and fresh white roses. I looked at the glass vanity desk. The white orchid corsage Richard dropped lay near the edge, a discarded prop from a canceled production. I picked up the plastic box and dropped it into the wastebasket beneath the counter. The gesture felt definitive. I turned to my bridesmaids. Lauren smoothed the front of her sage dress, her shoulders dropping 2 inches as the adrenaline faded. Maya set the sparkling cider down and handed me my bridal bouquet. "It is time," Lauren said softly. We exited the suite and walked toward the main elevator bank. We bypassed the rear service elevator Richard utilized for his escape. We rode down to the ground floor in comfortable silence. The doors parted, revealing the sunlit foyer of the estate. Standing near the grand staircase, waiting patiently, was my mother. She wore a soft navy chiffon dress. Her silver hair was curled neatly, framing a face lined with decades of quiet endurance. She held a small clutch purse in her hands, her fingers shifting nervously over the clasp. Those hands were rough, calloused from thousands of double shifts at a local diner. She spent her entire adult life carrying hot plates and standing on aching feet in orthopedic shoes to ensure our electric bill was paid. She never attended country club galas. She never drove a luxury German sedan. But she also never missed a single one of my 18 birthdays. She stayed when the bank accounts were empty. She built a home out of wreckage. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes scanned the foyer behind me, darting toward the lobby entrance, bracing herself for the inevitable appearance of her former husband. She expected Richard to march down the stairs, take my arm, and relegate her to a passive spectator at her own daughter's wedding. "He is not here, Mom," I told her. I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers, stopping the nervous shifting of her fingers. She blinked, searching my face for the catch. "Where did he go?" "He left," I replied. My voice carried a gentle, reassuring cadence. "He is never coming back. The stage is closed." A profound relief washed over her features. The chronic tension she carried in her jaw released. She did not ask for the specific tactical details. She did not need to know about the federal affidavits or the frozen credit lines. She only needed to know the perimeter was secure. I linked my arm through hers. The fabric of her navy dress felt soft against my skin. "I am not walking down that aisle with a phantom," I said. "I am walking with the woman who actually earned the right to stand beside me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, pulling her shoulders back. She offered me a radiant, authentic smile. A venue coordinator holding a clipboard stepped into the foyer. She wore a headset and offered a polite nod. "Miss Baker, the string quartet is prepared. The guests are seated. We are ready for your procession." We followed the coordinator down a long, carpeted corridor leading toward the rear of the property. The heavy double doors at the end of the hall stood closed, guarding the entrance to the botanical gardens. Faint melodic notes of a cello and 2 violins drifted through the thick wood. The coordinator opened the doors. The late afternoon Tennessee sun poured into the corridor, bathing the space in a warm golden light. The autumn air carried the scent of dry leaves and damp earth. We stepped out onto the stone patio overlooking the garden. A long aisle lined with white flower petals stretched across the manicured lawn. Ancient oak trees formed a natural canopy overhead, their branches filtering the sunlight into dancing, dappled patterns on the grass. I began the slow procession forward. My mother maintained a steady pace beside me. I scanned the gathered crowd. 75 genuine faces turned toward us. I saw college roommates, former coworkers, and neighbors who had offered support during difficult seasons. I saw people who knew my favorite book, my career aspirations, and my coffee order. I saw authentic relationships built on mutual respect. Then my gaze drifted toward the front rows on the left side of the aisle, the designated priorities section. The wooden folding chairs were perfectly, beautifully empty. There were no venture capital investors sitting in quiet judgment. Marcus Sterling and his executive board were gone. They had received their couriered dossiers containing the stark evidence of Richard's insolvency and federal crimes. Risk management professionals do not linger at crime scenes. They had silently departed the estate before the music ever started, taking Richard's financial salvation with them. The empty seats extended further. Victoria was absent. Madison was absent. The space where the arrogant patriarch intended to stand and project his false narrative was vacant. The void did not feel hollow. It felt like a monument to enforced boundaries. It represented the triumph of truth over manipulation. The warm, solid pressure of my mother's hand gripped mine. That physical anchor grounded me in the present reality. I was not a disposable asset. I was a daughter walking beside her true parent. I looked down the length of the aisle. Luke stood beneath a floral archway draped in white roses and eucalyptus. He wore a tailored navy suit. His posture was relaxed yet undeniably attentive. He watched me approach, his eyes tracking my movement with unwavering focus. He glanced briefly toward the empty chairs on the left side of the lawn. He understood the tactical victory they represented. He looked back at me. He saw the tranquil clarity in my expression, knowing the battle fought in the suite upstairs had been definitively won. He gave me a small, proud nod. The silent communication spoke volumes. He acknowledged the strength it took to sever a toxic bloodline. He validated the quiet, calculated war I waged to protect our future. My mother and I reached the end of the aisle. She turned, kissed my cheek, and took her seat in the front row on the right. She sat tall, her posture radiating a quiet dignity. I stepped up to the floral arch and took Luke's hands. His palms felt warm and calloused, a comforting contrast to the cold calculation of the morning. The officiant began the ceremony. The spoken words drifted over the quiet garden. There was no corporate networking occurring in the background. There were no hushed whispers of illicit business deals. The atmosphere held no underlying tension. We exchanged our vows. The promises we made were not performative. They were authentic commitments built on a foundation of unyielding trust. We exchanged rings, the metallic slide of the bands finalizing the partnership. The officiant pronounced us married. Luke leaned in and kissed me. The gathered crowd erupted into genuine, joyous cheers. The applause echoed through the oak trees, a wave of celebratory noise that washed away the final remnants of the morning's anxiety. We turned to face our guests, our fingers intertwined. We began the recessional walk back up the aisle. The heavy burden of my father's shadow, a specter that haunted my periphery for nearly 2 decades, was permanently buried beneath the garden soil. The ledger of my childhood was officially closed. As we walked past the rows of cheering friends, I allowed my gaze to sweep over the crowd one final time. I smiled at the familiar faces, absorbing the vibrant energy of the reception, transitioning into the evening. But as my eyes crossed the back row, the smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Standing near the perimeter of the lawn, clutching a beaded evening bag like a defensive weapon, was Aunt Susan. She did not cheer. She did not smile. Her face was tight, her lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. She had watched the entire ceremony unfold. She witnessed the glaring absence of her brother and the venture capital investors. She knew the grand production had failed. Richard and Victoria fled the property to avoid law enforcement. Susan, however, remained inside the perimeter. The chief enabler had not yet faced the consequences of her complicity. The identity theft required a safe harbor, and Susan provided the mailbox. The ceremony was flawless, but the cleanup was not quite finished. I squeezed Luke's hand as we stepped off the grass and headed toward the reception hall. The main tumor was excised, but I still needed to address the enabling margins. 6 months pass. The calendar turns, shedding the final lingering remnants of winter. A distinct crispness settles over the Tennessee morning air, the kind of clear, unpolluted breeze that makes every inhale feel like a fresh start. I stand in the kitchen of our new townhouse, holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, and I listen to the silence. It is not the tense, suffocating quiet that precedes an argument. It is the tranquil, enduring peace of a secured perimeter. Richard is entirely absent from my life. He did not vanish this time because he found a more lucrative opportunity, nor did he drift away out of convenience. He is absent by my own ironclad design. Following the wedding reception, I did not experience a dramatic, tearful confrontation with my father. The resolution of my childhood trauma did not require a screaming match or a cinematic showdown in the rain. It required the cold, clinical execution of bureaucratic procedure. The Monday morning after the ceremony, while Luke and I boarded a flight for our honeymoon, the corporate dossier I couriered to Marcus Sterling acted as a precision explosive. Private equity firms operate on strict risk assessment protocols. When Vanguard Capital received the undeniable documented proof of federal identity theft and systemic insolvency, they did not ask Richard for an explanation. They did not invite him to a boardroom to negotiate. They simply withdrew their term sheet and severed all communication. That single withdrawal triggered the exact domino effect I mapped out on my yellow legal pad. Without the multi-million-dollar bridge loan, Apex Holdings defaulted on the commercial foreclosure in downtown Atlanta. The secondary lenders panicked. They enacted the cross-collateralization clauses buried deep within their loan agreements, moving with the same ruthless efficiency Richard once used to exploit others. The bank seized his corporate accounts. They placed liens on his luxury vehicles. They initiated foreclosure proceedings on the manicured estate in Belmead. The carefully curated illusion of the wealthy, untouchable chief executive evaporated in a matter of weeks, replaced by the stark, humiliating reality of public bankruptcy. Victoria, recognizing the impending asset forfeiture, filed for divorce before the first bank representative even arrived at their front door. She married a balance sheet, and when the ledger ran dry, she sought a new, safe harbor. The designer handbags and the cashmere coats were packed into boxes, and she departed, leaving Richard to face the financial wreckage alone. Madison was forced to return her leased German sedan and find employment. Aunt Susan retreated into a profound, isolated silence. Her social currency in the country club circles was eradicated by the scandal surrounding her brother, compounded by her own quiet terror regarding potential mail fraud charges. She never sent another text message to the family group chat. The whisper network of our city functioned exactly as designed, isolating the toxic elements and stripping them of their perceived power. My cell phone vibrates on the granite counter, breaking my reverie. I set my coffee mug down. I do not feel the familiar spike of adrenaline or the tightening of my stomach muscles that used to accompany a ringing phone. I tap the screen, bringing the notification into focus. It is an automated Google alert. Months ago, I configured the search engine algorithm to notify me of any news regarding Apex Holdings, LLC. I open the linked article. It is a feature published in a prominent regional business journal. The headline is concise and clinical. Federal investigators raid local venture capital firm amidst fraud allegations. I read the text. The journalist details how agents from the Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service executed a search warrant at the corporate headquarters of Apex Holdings shortly after sunrise. The investigation centers on allegations of wire fraud, tax evasion, and the illicit acquisition of consumer credit lines. Richard is named as the primary target of the federal probe. He is currently facing multiple indictments, his passport seized, his remaining assets frozen by federal decree. I stare at the digital text. I do not feel a rush of vindictive triumph. Vengeance is a messy, unpredictable emotion that often consumes the person wielding it. What I feel is profound, undeniable equilibrium. The mathematics of the universe finally corrected a decades-old discrepancy. A man who steals from his child eventually learns that the debt compounds with interest. Richard engineered his own destruction through his arrogance. I simply handed the audit report to the relevant authorities and stepped out of the blast radius. I close the browser window. I delete the alert configuration and lock the phone. I do not save the article. I do not forward the link to my mother. The past is effectively quarantined, and I have no desire to invite its ghost into my morning routine. Luke walks into the kitchen, returning from his early morning run. He is out of breath, his dark hair damp with exertion. He smiles when he sees me moving to the sink to pour a glass of water. Our marriage is a sanctuary built on mutual respect and unyielding transparency. We do not keep score, we do not navigate hidden agendas or tiptoe around fragile egos. We simply share the quiet, steady work of building a life together. He is the anchor that held firm while the storm raged, and his presence is a daily reminder of what genuine partnership looks like. My career at the auditing firm is thriving. The promotion I worked toward for 3 years was finalized last month. My mother visits for dinner every Sunday evening. Her posture is taller, the chronic anxiety permanently erased from her features. She no longer looks over her shoulder. She no longer shrinks to accommodate the collateral damage of a narcissistic man. She finally occupies the space she deserves, laughing freely and enjoying the peace she fought so hard to maintain. I leave the kitchen to prepare for the workday. I walk down the short hallway toward the bedroom. I pause in front of the full-length mirror mounted on the wall. I look at the reflection staring back. For 18 years, a fraction of my subconscious remained trapped in a dining room on my 10th birthday. I spent nearly 2 decades carrying the lingering fear of the little girl waiting for her father to return from the grocery store with a carton of vanilla ice cream. I carried the quiet, internalized shame of being discarded, of being measured as a disposable asset by the one man obligated to protect me. That little girl is gone. The woman standing in the mirror is formidable. She is a professional who dissects deception, who constructs impenetrable boundaries, and who protects her own peace with ruthless, surgical precision. She knows the difference between a biological connection and a genuine bond. She survived the fire and learned how to control the flames. Family is not defined by shared DNA or a signature on a birth certificate. Family is a title earned through consistent, reliable action. Family is the people who show up during the lean years, who sit with you in the quiet moments. Family is the partner who stands by the door when you change the deadbolts. Family is the community of friends who celebrate your milestones without presenting an invoice or demanding a starring role. I turn away from the mirror. I gather my leatherwork, tote my laptop, and my red felt-tip pen. I step out the front door and lock the deadbolt behind me, stepping into the bright, crisp Tennessee morning. The ghost of Richard Baker no longer haunts my periphery. The ledger of my childhood trauma is officially closed. I finally balanced my own books, and for the first time in my life, I am operating entirely in the black. Every child is born holding a blank ledger. Long before they understand the complexities of finance, mortgages, or corporate structure, they possess an inherent, almost instinctual ability to audit the adults in their lives. They track the promises kept and the promises broken. They measure the weight of an apology against the repetition of an offense. They record the quiet moments of sacrifice, the times a parent chose to stay, and the devastating moments a parent chose to walk away. Nevaeh's story is a dramatic culmination of a stolen identity and a ruined wedding. But the true tragedy of the narrative did not begin with a fraudulent credit application. It began on a 10th birthday, when a father decided his child was a disposable asset. It began the moment Richard looked at his daughter and saw only a line item he could liquidate to serve his own ambitions. In modern American culture, we often romanticize the titles of our family structures without demanding the character required to hold them. We place a profound cultural emphasis on the roles of father and mother, sometimes allowing the mere biological fact of parenthood to serve as a lifelong shield against accountability. Richard operated under this exact delusion. He believed that the title of father was a permanent VIP pass, a golden ticket that would allow him to bypass 18 years of absence and step right into the front row of his daughter's greatest milestone. He assumed that a last name and a shared genetic sequence would override a lifetime of neglect. But true family responsibility is not a title you are handed. It is a profound daily duty you must continuously earn. The foundation of a healthy traditional family structure does not rest on the optics of a perfect holiday photograph or the illusion of financial prosperity. It rests on the quiet, unglamorous bedrock of consistency. Consider the mother in this story. She represents the true grit of American family values. She did not have the luxury of a custom-tailored suit or the ability to write a 5-figure check to manipulate a narrative. She had orthopedic shoes, double shifts at a local diner, and the exhausting, terrifying reality of raising a child alone. Yet she provided the one thing Richard could never comprehend: emotional safety. She taught her daughter honesty by living it. She modeled fairness by showing up day after day, regardless of how heavy the burden became. When we guide our children, we are not merely keeping them fed and sheltered. We are handing them the blueprints they will use to construct their own boundaries, their own sense of self-worth, and their own future families. If we raise them with emotional awareness, if we teach them that love is synonymous with respect and that respect requires honesty, they learn to recognize deceit before it can take root in their lives. Nevaeh became a forensic auditor not by coincidence, but by necessity. She learned to spot the missing numbers in a corporate ledger because she spent her childhood trying to make sense of the missing figure in her own home. She developed an armor of cold logic to protect herself from the emotional chaos her father left behind. While her resilience is awe-inspiring, it begs a deeper, more melancholic question regarding how we guide the next generation. What kind of adults would our children become if they did not have to spend their youth building armor to survive us? Parenting is the longest, most exacting investment a human being can make. It requires the humility to apologize when we are wrong, the integrity to enforce fair rules, and the emotional intelligence to recognize our children as independent souls rather than extensions of our own egos. When we fail to instill these values, when we treat our children as backup plans or props to validate our own success, we do not just fracture a relationship. We create a debt that will inevitably come due. Richard thought he could pay off an 18-year emotional deficit with a fraudulent corporate check. He learned too late that the currency of trust, once squandered, cannot be counterfeited. Stories like Nevaeh's resonate because they strip away the polite fiction of the perfect American family and force us to examine the uncomfortable truths hiding in the margins. They remind us that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-preservation. If you have ever had to balance your own emotional ledger, if you have ever had to close the door on a toxic bloodline to protect your own peace, you are not alone. We share these journeys here on Pawn of Vengeance to validate the quiet strength of those who refuse to be collateral damage. If this narrative mirrored a chapter in your own life, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, join our community, and share your own experiences in the comments below. As we reflect on the shattered patriarch fleeing the bridal suite and the daughter walking down the aisle with her head held high, we are left to ponder the invisible ledgers we are writing right now. Every interaction with our children, our spouses, and our families is an entry in a book that will be read for generations. You can build an empire, accumulate wealth, and command the attention of the world. You can curate a flawless image and demand respect from everyone who crosses your path. But eventually the noise fades, the audience goes home, and you are left standing in the quiet reality of the choices you made when you thought no one was keeping score. The question is not whether the people in your life are keeping a ledger. The question is, when the final tally is calculated and the bottom line is drawn, what exactly will your balance be? Will you be surrounded by those who celebrate your presence, or will you find yourself staring at an empty chair, wondering how the arithmetic went so tragically wrong?